Welcome back to the Python for Beginners series at Homa Studio. This will be a quick video that'll just focus on the float and int data types and doing some conversions with them, and then also working on the round function just a little bit. We're not going to go really deep into numbers or anything like that or any high-end math, because the next exercise we do is going to be a tip calculator, so we'll be focusing on currency. So I have a file set up here called intfloat.py, and I have variables assigned x, y, and z, and they're assigned to 20, 20.3333. I have z, which is assigned to a calculation, division, 2 divided by 3, which should be something like 0.6667, or how many decimal places it ends up being. And then I just have print functions here that are just going to print these out. X is an integer, y is a floating point decimal, and z should end up being a floating point decimal after the division. So our output down here looks like this. This is just an integer. This is just a floating point decimal, came out the same way. And this, it made 666666 all the way across. It never made a 7 at the end. I think it does something like 16 places or something, so it never does a 7 at the end. And that's it. So what we want to talk about here is just kind of doing some conversions and also rounding these if we need to. And let me just point out something first. We'll just go over a couple things here. If x is 20 and I want that to be a floating point decimal, I could convert that, and I'll just show one thing here. This isn't the correct way to do this, but I mean, we can do this. We can float x, but if we print this out again, it doesn't change. You may say, why doesn't that change? If we made that a floating point, shouldn't it put like a 0.0 at the end? It actually will, except just one thing to point out is we're printing out the original variable. We're still printing out x here. Just because we're saying float x doesn't mean x is being changed. The original variable of x is not being changed. We're just floating it here, and that doesn't really do anything. You could float it up here. You could put, if you did float up here and wrapped it around here, that would do something, because now you're saying the variable x is a float of 20. So if you did this, then you'd get 20.0. If I didn't do that, let me just undo here. If I did this, this is reassigning a variable. So if I reassign the variable and I said, okay, the new value of x is going to be itself converted to a float, then if I printed this out, it's going to say 20.0 and it puts 1 decimal point there. Even if there's nothing there, it makes it a float and it puts 0.0. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we're going to do an exercise where we do a tip calculation where we're using currency, but it only adds 1 decimal place. One way to round things down, if I went here, if I took y and I wanted to round it, and I'm going to reassign it instead of going through that same thing I did before by saying, oh, look, it didn't change it. I'm going to reassign y and say y equals round, and I'll say y, comma, and let's say we'll do 2 decimal places. And I'll put a space in here just to make it look nicer, and I'll make sure I spell round correctly. Now, if I do that, and if I say that the new y is basically rounding y with 2 decimal places, it should come out to 233. So let's try that out. And there it is, 20.33. Same thing here. If I wanted to round this, now you can round it by reassigning, or you can also round it when you print. So if I wanted to print out z, I could say round and make sure I put the parentheses inside here and that you have enough. There should be 4 parentheses, and I'll put z, comma, and I'll put, or let's say 3. We'll do 3 this time. Now, what should happen here? It's going to round it to 3 places, except rounding will round it to the nearest number. So if it goes to 3 places, it should be 667. And let's see what happens. And that's what it does. It rounds 3 places, it rounds z to 3 places, and it goes to 667. This one gets rounded 2 places, and it went to 233, and the original one, because it's a float, doesn't get rounded at all. Now, you could try different things here to see what happens. One thing to point out, too, if this happened to be 2335 or something like that, and we rounded it, you can see what happens. It actually rounds up. So it rounds up the 3, because it's 5 or more, it rounds it up to 20.34. This one stays the same. We didn't do anything else with that. Now, if we needed currency or something, let's say this needed to be $20. We have 20.0. We need it to be currency. And you might say, well, let's take x again, and let's do it. We could do it right here. We'll just reassign x one more time. We'll say x. We'll do the round function, and we'll say x, comma 2. That should put 20.00, right? Well, no, it won't. It still keeps it at 20.0. It doesn't add numbers to it. So I'm just pointing that out because when we work with currency, we're going to have to do some other formatting to add zeros to that. And then also another way to shorten things, if you wanted to take the numbers off, like let's say you started off with y. Let's take off this round thing, and you converted y back to an integer. You could just do this. You can put y in there, and if you convert a floating point to an integer, it'll just wipe off any decimals. It'll just take it down. And I'll run it one more time. And you can see it just cuts it off and it leaves it at 20. And also one thing to point out too, if this was 20.9999, so almost 21, let's say y was almost 21, and you converted it to an integer, it wouldn't care. It would just cut off the decimal. So integer just cuts off the decimal. It doesn't round it at all. Round will take it to a certain number of places, and it should round it up. It will not round it down. It will only round it up. And there's something called ceil and floor, which we'll deal with later. We're not going to deal with right now, but I just wanted to point that out as far as here are float conversions, and make sure that you reassign the variable when you're doing it, or do the conversion as part of the variable. That's what we're doing here. We're reassigning. And when you do the round function, you basically just indicate the variable and how many decimal places after it. So anyway, that's ints and floats, and we're going to move on with a tip calculation exercise.